back to Season 2 of Leaders Recon. I am super excited for our first guest this season, Sergeant First Class Ethan Law.
Hey.
Or as you know him, Habitual Line Crosser.
That would be me.
Welcome to the program.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, this is great. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
I'm a little nervous, but I'm here for it. It's weird being in front of cameras actually in uniform again.
See, I feel like you probably spend more time in front of cameras than I do.
I do, but it's usually just like me locked in my game room with like a phone in front of me.
There's no audience.
Arguing with myself. Yes, it's a little bit easier that way. So
you've kind of gotten into this thing where you're bringing current events to soldiers through the personas that you've created. You know, the buff, the F-35, at probably most importantly, and I think he'd agree, the F-22.
Ah, the kid. Yes.
The kid. Yes. So where did this come from?
So growing up as a kid, I always kind of did voices, like weird, I would watch a movie and, a Schwarzenegger movie, and I would be back. Like, I would try and emulate those voices, and I've never really aspired to be any kind of voice actor. And I originally did skit comedy a little bit when I was doing social media. And then one day I was like, let's try out this, green screen style. Let's see if people really like it. And I'd seen other people doing it, but they had never really done different voices, different accents. And I was like, maybe that's something that can kind of differentiate me from everybody else. And I just went for it, and people loved it.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of the characters, they come to me, and other ones I feel a little forced. So like I was reading about the F-22, and I was just like, what is this thing capable of? Like, Mach 2, it's roughly the size of a bumblebee on radar cross section. It can turn around within the length of its own aircraft. Like, it's super maneuverable, but it's never gotten an air-to-air kill. And I was like, that is Buffalo Bob or Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. That's kind of what I went with. So they all just, that's the way I've looked at it. The buff, the B-52 Stratofortress, been around since 1955.
Yeah. He's
put in a whole lot of work, and I was like, that's Grandpa Buff. That's who he's going to be. That's just kind of how it happened.
There are military recruiters out there, but in a way, you're still in the early days. You're the frontier days of military presence and influence on these social media platforms that the next generation is engaging with. So establishing those guardrails, I mean, there's no doctrine for it, which kind of turning it back to like what it is that you do. Like watching a lot of your videos, you're clearly a doctrine wonk.
Oh yeah, I like learning things. My grandfather used to say, the day you think you've learned everything, dig your own grave.
Yep.
So for me, I want to learn as much as I can about everything that I can. So my job as an air defender is knowing about like radars, missiles, capabilities. A lot of that I can't really speak about, but then I got into this space where I started talking about aircraft. And people started asking me more questions about aircraft, which was a forcing function for me to learn as much as I could about these aircraft. And so I take every opportunity even here. So again, I'm air defense artillery, but I work with a lot of field artillery. And if I'm not on cycle and I'm not too busy, I'll go sit in one of their classrooms and I'll ask questions. Well, how does that work? How does that work? And is it going to pertain to my job? No, but it might be cool information that I'd love to learn.
And you've also got like this real interest in current events too, and that's kind of the thing that you've tied into your videos. Where did that interest in current events come from?
So my wife and I, every morning, we just leave the news on while we're having our breakfast, drinking our coffee, and for a little while, I would watch the news, and I'm like, I could make fun of that. I could make fun of that. And I remember, we both grew up during the time of Jay Leno, who was like the king of, news satire comedy. He did so good, and I used to watch him as a kid. And one day I was just like, let's make fun of the news. Let's see, let's find a funny news story. And I don't even remember what my first time doing it was. And it took off. And I was like, that's so wonderful. It's such an amazing feeling. You get your haters. You're always going to run into those people who have something negative to say. But what keeps me going is the people who reach out to me. I had an individual very recently reach out to me. He said that he had discovered my videos shortly after his wife had passed away from leukemia.
Whoa.
And he's like, man, you really kept my head up, and it's a great feeling to be able to deliver that to people. That's my wife says that's why my heart is in the right place, is because I do want to try and pull people out of those sad times, and if I can do it, giving them information and making them laugh, that's just a double win for me. There's a lot of people who say they get their world news from my videos, which is it's kind of funny.
Yeah, and kind of tagging off of that, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but bringing it up. There is that online sense of community too, and kind of how that plays into that larger resiliency framework for soldiers who are going through it and feeling like they have a home in creators who speak to them in a way that they feel heard and seen.
Yeah, it's a way to humanize our position. You know, we're not robots. I remember when I was a young private, I looked up at the sergeant first class and I was like, he knows everything. He is all about the Army. And I get to this position and I was just like,
where did the adults go?
I was like, that guy was making it up every day. No, so it's really a good way to interact. And the thing that I love about social media, and shout out to Sergeant Major of the Army who has a Twitter. I don't have a Twitter, but we've all known the telephone game that the Army has. Mm-hmm. Sergeant Major comes through and he sees, a piece of trash on the ground and he just goes, hey, Sergeant, can you pick that up real quick? Mm-hmm. Well, that sergeant picks it up, and then that translates to the squad leader that, well, Sergeant Major thinks the barracks is dirty. And then that translates to the team leader that, hey, Sergeant Major said outside the barracks is awful. And then now that private is getting yelled at because Sergeant Major said the building is disgusting. And it's the telephone game that goes on down, but with social media, you can get information, figuratively speaking, straight from the horse's mouth.
Right.
So you can debunk any of those miscommunications because this is exactly what I said, how I said it, and why I said it.
Right.
It also gives a digital open door policy. People are less afraid to approach a sergeant major, a colonel, a general, if it's through social media. And guess what? It's still kept in-house because the Army's all about keeping things in-house. Mm-hmm. If that soldier reaches that senior leader through social media channels, that's still in-house. That's still open door policy. And for the life of me, I can't really understand why more leaders aren't utilizing that tool.
Well, I mean, it's so powerful because, like you said, it effectively breaks that stovepipe system that's so plagued the military for so long, where information sometimes travels up, it sometimes travels down, but it never travels left and right.
It's a really great thing. Now, I feel like there's two sides of every coin.
Sure.
The benefit of it is, of course, it opens those channels. Some of the negativity around it could be that people either A, take things out of context, or B, the wrong people are going to be putting out the wrong message.
Right.
It can also, again, a good thing, it can hold leaders accountable. Like I know for myself, I can't say something on social media and when someone meets me in life, not live it. I know that I can't do that. So especially when I speak about like Army policy and the way doctrine works, I can't live that. I can't have uniform deficiencies. I can't have, an unshaved face. I can't do those things because I have to be that standard and I have to be that example. And maybe some people just don't want to have that kind of visibility where they have to be the standard.
Well, I think it's a tool like anything else. A hammer, you can hit your thumb, or you can hit the nail and build the shed. But so tying it back to current events, you said, a lot of soldiers actually go to your channel to kind of get their current events update. I mean, I certainly love the community. I'm big into current events myself, but your takes always make me laugh. But for those soldiers who maybe just the news just isn't for them, but they're getting that information from you, why is maintaining an awareness of current events important for soldiers and leaders?
Because it gives you a little predictability in everything that is going on. We are a global functioning military, more or less. We're everywhere all the time. And when you pay attention to what's going on in the world, you can affect a larger audience. And through social media, especially humor, you make it easier to digest. These kids are in the dopamine generation.
Right.
I know for a fact because I pay attention to my analytics. If I don't drop a joke in the first 5 seconds of my video, I lose 60% of my viewership right there. I know that for a fact. If I don't have a good punchline at the end, I will lose probably around 40% of my interaction. I know that. That is something I know from this. So I can take the same exact information the Army wants us to know, and I can spin it in a way with a sense of humor that it reaches a wider audience, including that young soldier who's in their barracks room scrolling through TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and they all of a sudden they're like, I didn't know the Army put out a new policy about this.
Right.
They get that information, and then that's a forcing function to go, well, let me check this update to this regulation. Oh, that doesn't pertain to me, but it does pertain to somebody else. Hey, man, have you seen this? And they send it to their friend, and now you're affecting a larger audience than when you just put it on one page and say, update DoD number, blah, 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 blah. Please read pertaining to. That's not digestible. That's not something that is reaching that young generation. So I think especially for policy changes, doctrinal changes, utilizing social media content creation in the right way will get your message out much faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And two, like you said, this generation is moving and changing, and technology is changing ever faster.
Yeah.
And trying to keep up with that information flow when young soldiers are basically under a deluge of information, breaking through that noise is so important.
It's very, and it's getting harder to do. There's always somebody out there willing to do more outlandish stuff than the other people.
Well, you don't have $1 million to give away for people to, keep their hands on a giant jelly cube?
No, my wife gives me such a hard time because I don't mind spending money on her. It doesn't even faze me. Me, I hate spending money on myself. So like, I use everything bagel seasoning on my breakfast every morning. I have like a little egg omelet on toast and stuff. And I had a bottle of everything bagel seasoning in my Amazon cart for 2 weeks. It was $4 because I just couldn't pull the trigger on it, man.
That's a big purchase. I mean,
$4 is huge. It's great.
A lot of the stuff that you cover in your videos specifically tends to pertain to air defense. You've got all the different airframes and how they're kind of interacting with different air defense systems. So what is your background?
So my background, I'm a 14 Echo Patriot Fire Control Enhanced Operator Maintainer.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a Patriot guy for short. I'm the tactician, I guess. I shoot things down. Well, I'm supposed to in theory. I've only done it like once, but before that, I was a 19 kilo. I was an armor crewman. I worked on the Abrams main battle tank. I loved it. I loved that job. I went to re-enlist. They said, pick a new job or get out. So I came over. I came over to air defense, and I tell you, I will be totally transparent. I did not like air defense. I really didn't. For like the first 3 years I was in it, and I remember I was here at Fort Sill, and my boss sent me to the gate. And if you're a 14 Echo and they send you to gate guard, that means you're not useful to your organization. And that was my proverbial, I guess, come to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to go back, and I may think this stuff is silly, but I'm going to learn as much as I can about it. And some people refer to it as like drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yep.
And I came back, and I started just absorbing like a sponge, and I started crushing records. I mean, my AMG crew was killing it. And then I went into a van crew, the ECS, the Engagement Control Station, where you actually control the Patriot system from. I was a commo guy in there. And I started creating TTPs, internal tactics, techniques, and procedures internal to our organization that started to spread across the organization, because when I would fail something, I would learn. Every time I'd fail, I would learn, and I failed a lot. And I would learn something new, so I started just picking it up. And then while we were overseas, I became a tactical control assistant, which is the actual tactician in there with the officer. And then I came back and I was a battery trainer, and I just started picking up as much as I possibly could. And turns out I kind of became a savant at this stuff, and I love it. It's like a chess game to me. Like the enemy does this, I do this. Their missile can do this, I have to do this. And it's like the most lame graphics, real-time strategy game that you could ever play. And with that, being an air defender, air defense is very, number one, underrepresented in social media and in the media in general. I mean, most people didn't even know the United States Army had Patriot until it was sent overseas.
Right.
And then it became immediately into the limelight, and everyone cared about it. But Patriot's been doing its job for a long time. The Saudis have been using it. The Emiratis have been using it. The Kuwaitis have been using it. I mean, it's been used for a long time. It's a very efficient system. So naturally, when it became public information that was out there, the questions and the misinformation arose. You can't see this, you can't do that. And then me, obviously knowing the real information, I go to Google and Wikipedia, and I see what is out there and that I can talk about and that I can explain, because of course I don't want to divulge any classified information. And I just started collecting that information, and well, it doesn't really work that way. This is exactly how it works, at least according to public record. It does this instead of this. And that information, my following really likes it when I break things down like that.
Yeah, you're right, because a lot of folks don't know a whole lot about this stuff. And then you've got somebody who's able to package it in a way that's really engaging to watch, and it's informative, and you get a little bit of a current events update too.
Yeah, I enjoy it. Honestly, it's the best job I've ever had. I really enjoy it so much.
Creating content in uniform is kind of tricky, right? There are a lot of guardrails or a lot of rules, kind of like you just alluded to. In your case specifically, there's the added guardrails because you're dealing with current events that are political adjacent, and we are an apolitical organization. How do you kind of manage that balance without, pardon my pun, crossing the line?
So for me, it's I think the lucky part of it is I can touch on certain politics because I become a faceless country, right? It's just my eyes and mouth, and it is a country. It is an entity that is not politically biased one way or the other. And I can talk about new things that are happening, and I guess I just got lucky getting into that headspace because luckily for me, I'm just using luckily just nonstop here. Why not? Luckily for me, what I can do is when I make a joke about a country, a policy, a law, a current event, being that it's just a faceless country instead of a specific politician, both sides of the political spectrum find it funny.
Right.
And that's where I got lucky because it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you fall on, somebody wants to cancel you. Right. So I always try to avoid it as much as I can, but if it's a really good joke, there's sometimes I just can't pass on a really good joke, like, I might, or...
There's a certain video that comes to mind recently.
Yeah. But it's, I couldn't do it if I was doing actual politicians. I guess that's the easiest way to break it down.
Yeah, you're able to talk broad strokes just about events and kind of satirize the overall event more than any particular policy, prescription, or individual.
Yeah. I do have, on top of the Army policy, obviously not violating SHARP, the Sexual Harassment Assault Response and Prevention, or the EO, the Equal Opportunity Program. Those are the two big ones. That being said, I also use my moral compass a lot, and I tend to believe that my heart's in the right place with those things. Like I don't make jokes about awful things that have happened. For example, the Holocaust. I don't make Holocaust jokes.
Sure.
I don't make any kind of genocide jokes.
Right.
I don't make jokes about large tragedies like 9/11. I don't make jokes about that. I try not to make jokes about Pearl Harbor unless, of course, I talk about things that happened afterward. Don't touch the boats.
So you effectively establish for yourself that comedic third rail, if you will.
As much as I can, because I understand that I am an individual entity, but I'm also, while I wear this uniform, I'm a representation of what people should perceive as an American soldier.
Yep.
And with that, I have to match that perception and that level of professionalism in everything that I do.
So for soldiers and leaders who are looking to get brushed up on current events, how do they go about wading through the quagmire of all the conflicting information to kind of really get at the nut of what is going on?
For me, sometimes I can't even get through it myself, and I use other social media channels. There's Philip DeFranco is a good one, and then Alex Hollings from Sandbox News, he's another good one. This is the thing. What you need to pay attention to, and what I try to pay attention to, is quantifiable and quantitative, qualitative, kind of like we do with our non-commissioned officer evaluation reports. You need something, so if someone says something, well, this country said this, is there any way to prove that? Is there any way to disprove that? How many other things are echoing? Where did this information come from? Those are the things you need to track down. You find out more often the propaganda game is strong, especially when it comes to social media. Everyone has their own political affiliation or national affiliation that they want to try and push a positive image of that. So I start out kind of, I guess in the, let's prove this wrong any way that I can.
Yeah.
And I look at it from as many avenues as I possibly can, like equipment being destroyed overseas. Is there a video of it being destroyed? When is that photo from? Can I reverse image search that photo and find out it came from a different year or a different country or something like that? And it's getting harder every single day, I will tell you that much.
So you do quite a lot of research when you're putting these things together, and I think that's what's kind of daunting for a lot of line level leaders who understand, like, current events are going to dictate training to some degree.
Yes.
And oftentimes that's kind of like a motivating function. Go back to 2006, the surge, right?
Yep.
Hey, there's a surge coming, fellas. Like, we're probably going to Afghanistan or Iraq sooner rather than later. And that became like a motivating factor in driving physical fitness or driving training motivation or driving just overall attentiveness and the seriousness with which soldiers treated that training.
Yeah.
So once those leaders have gotten informed and we're trying to get to that point where there is that level of motivation, how can they go about implementing what they've learned in their formations to drive that training? What are some messaging strategies?
I would think that at least for me, it was always a conversation with my subordinates and peers. It's always a conversation. You don't want to say, this is happening, this is what's going to happen. Don't be definitive in anything, because if it doesn't happen, then you just made your organization fearful for reasons that don't need to be there.
And that trust level too.
Yeah, absolutely. So try not to be definitive unless the information is definitive. You know, if it comes from an official source that says you guys are leaving on this day at this time, that's information you should put out. But if you see, hey, 50,000 more troops are being sent to this country, just, hey, heads up, I don't know if this pertains to us, but just so you guys are aware.
Right.
One of the things we do here at the Academy is every morning I have a military news NCO and I have a civilian news NCO, and they find a military news story and a civilian news story, and every day they brief the class. And there's no reason you can't do that at any organization. You can have a couple of your soldiers, hey, find me a good news story tomorrow, and we'll talk about it here. We'll see what's going on. But make sure that it is an approachable and combined way of doing things. You don't want to just bark it at somebody. It should be a conversation.
So aside from your comedic hot takes and parodies, you pretty routinely engage in a much more candid way with your audience. Why is this method of communication really important for leaders?
So with leaders and with my following, one of the things I never wanted to be is I never wanted to be unreachable.
Yeah.
Even when and it's hard. It's really difficult. Like there's like a couple thousand people in my Discord. And every once in a while, if I have spare time, like I did it last weekend and I haven't done it in months, I was playing a video game and I just hopped into one of the voice chats. And if they want to talk to me, hop in. Like they were in one of the text chats and they were like, why is he in that chat? Like, what is he doing? And I was just there. One of my buddies was like, go talk to him. He's a person. Like, so I never wanted to be unreachable. I always wanted to be approachable. And then on Friday nights, I stream on YouTube because, for me, it's not about that. That right there is not about trying to make money or trying to sell anything. It's you have questions to ask me in real time. I want to be able to answer them in real time. And it's the same thing for my subordinates. We as NCOs, we as leaders in general, our entire worth is kind of based off of the results we get.
Sure.
What can we do? And now a lot of people focus on like just the unit's mission. Now, while the unit's mission is incredibly important, I'll never deny that. Oftentimes things that are laid by the wayside are soldier problems because they're seen as too small. One of the things I did at White Sands, again, Army, do not mandate this. Do not make this a requirement. Leaders should do this on their own. Okay, just want to make sure the Army's listening. Sorry. I would, once a month, whenever I had time, I would sit down with all my E4 and below, and I was the platoon sergeant at the time, and I said, what's your gripes? And that was their opportunity to give me candid information about what is going on. And some people call it a sensing session, but oftentimes that allows me the opportunity to explain why something happened. Most of it is just like idle gripes, like, why do we have to get up in the morning for PT?
But the food's not very good.
Yeah, like, okay, there's things that I can affect, things that I can't affect. And what I started doing is I would write them all down in my notebook, and the next month I would come back and say, these are what I was able to solve for you. And that builds their trust in me. And then I would also do the same thing with my NCOs. And that was their opportunity to say, hey, you're messing up, Big Sergeant. Like, you're not doing this right. And but it's a good way to build that camaraderie and that interpersonal relationship with my subordinates, because while their gripes may not seem big to Big Army or to the command team because they got a myriad of other things to worry about.
That person's got a whole thing going on.
Exactly. They have their own problems. So I remember when I started doing that, I had 11 pay inquiries because my soldiers weren't getting paid properly. And every day I was calling finance until eventually they solved my pay inquiries. And guess what? That got solved, but that built their trust in me. They wanted a printer for the area the soldiers would hang out in the COF, so that way when they were doing their online training, they didn't have to email it to their NCO to get it to print. That's not a hard problem. Hey, supply, can we get a printer in here because of A, B, and C? Well, hey, the command team has to approve it. No problem. Let me go talk to the commander. Boom, they got a printer. It's a minor thing, but it improves their quality of life, and it builds their trust in their leadership. So that, I guess that ties everything all together, and it's just a little bit of extra effort.
Yeah, and you said something earlier that was so important in this sensing session, because a lot of, especially young leaders, have that initial inclination, well, we didn't do that because of this. And it's defensive. Yeah. But what you described, I'm not even sure if you're aware of it, was you acknowledge what's going on. Yeah, I did actually consider it. I saw that as an issue, this is why I didn't change it, and you broke it out for them. So you acknowledge the gripe without that wall of defense. I mean, the first time a leader who's doing a session like that, well, no, we can't do that. Faces go blank. They're not going to ask any more questions.
Exactly. You need to have that open crosstalk. And
Yep.
there are some, old school leaders that well, why are they telling that to the platoon sergeant? They should tell it to their team leader. Sometimes they have said that to their team leader, which is a forcing function for me. Hey, team leader, why didn't I know about this? Why wasn't I aware that this soldier had this pay issue? Well, you were busy, you were A, B, and C. No, pay issue, way more important than anything else I got going on. I need to solve these issues. Oh, well, I apologize. Then I set the precedence for my NCOs of what I expect them to bring to me. Try and solve it on your own, absolutely. But if you're unable to solve it, I am here to help that process.
Right.
And I feel like there's some leaders that are so far away from the boots on the ground that they don't have anything to identify with that younger generation. I mean, I've been doing this 15 years, and these kids come in, and there's some things they do that I just don't understand. But my younger NCOs do, and my younger NCOs can teach me about those things because I've been smart enough to eat that humble pie and all right, now I get it.
You officially reached the age where the Utes are giving you trouble.
Yeah, I can't. These kids, man. But this is the thing. A lot of the things they do, we've done.
Yep.
We've all done it. Like that kid walking around, we all make fun of it, with his army belt. He's got the blue jeans with his regular, his boots from work, and he's got his dog tags hanging out. That's boot stuff. We've all done boot stuff. We've all just done those things, man. And
you look at it, you're just like, oh man, I did that once. I'm embarrassed for myself.
Yeah, but so many people just blast him, and it's like, bro, I guarantee you could find the Sergeant Major of the Army, you could find the Joint Chief of Staff, back when he was a second lieutenant, and be like, okay, I know you've done some boot stuff. What boot stuff have you done? We've all done it. So I think laughing at yourself is also incredibly important.
Well, and that ties a lot of things together because, I mean, like you talked about, social media, it's the ultimate open door policy. But when you're standing here person to person, I mean, when you're E1 private, staff sergeant or sergeant first class is the closest thing to God walking on earth.
Yeah.
And an officer walking around, forget about it. That's like one of the titans out of Greek mythology.
Yeah.
But, when you're acknowledging what they're going through, you're developing that trust, you're able to actually create those lines of communication that you need to have in person, not just that faceless digital communication.
Yeah, one of the greatest leaders I've ever met, Staff Sergeant Casey Grakowiak, he unfortunately lost his life in Afghanistan. He was a good friend of mine. Great guy, great leader, great NCO. I mean, honestly, if you'd have told me we were going to lose him in Afghanistan, I'd have told you, you're wrong. We're all going before him. He's 10 foot tall and bulletproof. The man was a monster. I loved him. Great guy, super down to earth. And he taught me that being a leader is walking this, he said, invisible gray line, which I now know it kind of just doesn't make any sense, but stay with me here. This invisible gray line, and it's not straight. It's all over the place, and it's moving. It's doing loop-de-loops because it changes.
Yep.
And on one side of things, you're too stern, and your soldiers will not approach you when they have a problem. On the other side, you're too friendly, and they don't respect your level of authority. And I've always tried to just maintain, I've leaned one way a little bit too hard one way or the other. And I mean, leadership in general is just a perpetual learning experience.
Yep, absolutely.
I tend to believe I'm a better leader now than I was 5 years ago. And I'm a better leader 5 years ago than I was 10 years ago. We just all need to learn, how to do those things. And I think an important lesson the Army needs to learn in general is laugh at yourself. The Army is the funniest place I've ever worked.
It really is.
So many funny things that happen. And I mean, even vets who are watching this right now, the Army is the funniest place. You're not supposed to laugh. It's hilarious. And why not allow people to laugh at it?
Yeah, and there's that humanization aspect of it too, which again goes back to that approachability. And still, you can laugh at yourself. I've had leaders who I answered to who great communication, great humor, laugh together. As soon as the mission came up, they were clicked on, and everybody knew their role. Like that was the established line.
Yeah,
and that culture was so positive, and it made us function more effectively. It made us more confident in each other. It made us trust each other more, and it really, benefits all down the line.
Yeah, here I have a great example of a command team here. I love my command team here. Being in an academy, we have a civilian, and then of course we have the commandant, which is a command sergeant major. We fall under a headquarters, but they don't. They're kind of distant from us, and then I have my first sergeant. So it's all NCO ran, and I have a great chain of command here because I can laugh with them. I can talk with them. You know, I can joke around with them. I joked with my first sergeant this morning, but also when my feet need to be put to the fire, because nobody's perfect, they do it. And and I understand that line, that boundary, but I have a great communication. And because of things like that, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, because I have that interpersonal relationship with my chain of command, I don't want them to get in any trouble. I don't want them to fail. So I work harder so that they are covered. I will go the extra mile to make sure that they're taken care of, because I don't know if their replacement is going to be 10 times worse than them. You know, I've been doing this long enough, so.
And it all goes back to they've established that trust with you. Like,
Absolutely.
you trust them.
100%.
And that clearly defined boundary has been set. It's that when you don't set that boundary, I think that kind of goes back to when, you know, your soldiers don't respect you or listen to you or see your authority. So I think it's, that clear delineation. So there are some leaders who might argue that engaging in this level of, yes, there's that line and you can joke, but also if you cross that line, feet held to the fire, who might argue that that level of interaction between the ranks does run the risk of dissolving the professional line, especially as it relates to when you're engaging with soldiers with their problems outside of, you know, the uniform. What is your response to that mentality? Like, how should we approach it? Is there a way that we can strike that balance, do you think?
I think that every leader should be finding that balance. The days and years of just hiding from a sergeant major as they come through the motor pool and start yelling at everybody are kind of gone. Those days are behind us. And I'm sure that's going to hurt a lot of feelings from like old school vets and things like that. And that's okay. The Army is an ever-changing, ever-learning machine. The Army learns. We spend so much money on learning how to do things, right? Like call Center for the Army Lessons Learned. We have DATE, the Decisive Action Training Environment. We spend all this time learning and teaching. Like I teach at a non-commissioned officer academy. Like it's all about learning. Why would we have an aversion to learning to use another tool? And that's ultimately what social media is. It's another tool. Now, I understand not everybody's a creator. Not everybody can appeal to people using humor. But I bet there's somebody in your organization who can. I bet that there is somebody out there who is willing to push the envelope a little bit, make that information easier to digest, to get soldiers motivated to hear it and listen to it. Now, as for affecting outside the chain of command,
chain of command, just outside of uniform.
Outside of uniform. So affecting outside of uniform is, I think, an important part of humanizing your position. Yes, we're a soldier 24/7. Everyone's heard that. It's on, you know, it's written everywhere. You're a soldier 24/7. Well, if I'm a soldier 24/7, then whether I'm wearing this or not wearing this, I can still give leadership advice and mentorship to somebody. And the avenue of which I choose to do that shouldn't matter. So I would say that any leader that has an aversion to utilizing social media to affect their organization in more ways than one should probably watch this and maybe learn what they could do, or find out if they have any creators in their organization and find out what they're doing wrong. Eat that humble pie and learn how to use these systems better.
Well, one example from my own personal experience, a few years ago, you know, we found out through social media that a specific soldier was going through a traumatic life event. Didn't talk about it, didn't tell his leadership about it. We found out through there, and by using social media, not just as a way of communicating to soldiers, learning about what's going on in soldiers' lives is such a powerful tool to kind of preempt those, you know, hairline fractures that are going to cause those mental breaks potentially down the line as they're unable to handle that stress.
It can help combat a lot of things. It can help, let's just look at the far extremes. You could potentially save someone's life who's thinking about committing suicide. You could potentially either stop, it's albeit rare, stop sexual harassment or sexual assault before it happens, or get enough evidence to prosecute those individuals to the fullest extent of the law. That being said, people also need to understand that there's a big difference between a false claim and unsubstantiated. Like sometimes there's just not enough evidence, and giving you that ability, getting that evidence is really good. You can, like you said, see things that are happening in someone's life and affect that, because let's say that soldier just wants to focus on the mission and doesn't want to be a problem. Let's say that they view it that way. Because you as leaders saw that, addressed that, and let them know, hey, these resources are available, or would you like to take some emergency leave to go to wherever this is going on? We are here for it. That lets that soldier know that I'm not a bother. My chain of command actually cares about me, and they want to know those things, and that builds that cross-trust. So monitoring social media is important. Posting on social media is important. Utilizing it to affect a far larger audience than even, I mean, there's, again, not to toot my own horn, there's millions of people that watch my videos and things like that. And if I put out something, even if I put out something that's not a green screen video and I talk to people, there's a lot of people going to see that. And I can affect a far greater audience. There's individuals, I've said things about military doctrine before, and it's a forcing function. They're going to go look that up and, hey, my chain of command wasn't doing this correctly. I can use this to help educate others and teach them how to do things. A hugely valuable tool that I feel like is being underutilized, but with programs like this podcast, I think that this is a good step in the right direction. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely. So this last question, we've kind of danced around it this entire time, so we're just going to go at it.
Okay.
You talk to anybody in uniform. The Army is the funniest place on earth. You will meet, a good friend of mine will tell you about the time at the Battle of Mamasai, and he knows who he is.
Yep.
Where he almost got killed by a mortar, and he will have you in stitches recounting the story. I mean, dying laughing.
You have to laugh in this job, but I'm sorry, continue.
Well, no, Ed, that's exactly what I want to get at. Why is humor in uniform so important?
Humor in uniform is so important because, how do I word this? So for me, I started making humor in uniform because I don't want people to feel how low I felt at certain times in my life. And the Army, the military in general, is going to ask you to do things that are dangerous, that you don't want to do. That you're going to go through some of the worst things you've ever experienced in the military, but you're also going to go through some of the funniest and best things you've ever experienced. And recounting on those funny times is really what keeps people going. You hear a lot of vets who get out and they're like, the thing that they miss most is the camaraderie. And it isn't the camaraderie of like having to pull back-to-back CQ shifts. It's the camaraderie of like laughing with their buddies and joking about whatever. It is the one thing that brings all military members together is the combination of humor. I mean, we can all understand it to some extent. I can talk to sailors. I can talk to Marines. I can talk to maybe even, what are the Guardians now? Space Force? Yeah, those guys. And we all have similar experiences, but they're going to be like, they're going to hear some of the things I say, like, that's wild, man. We would never do that like that. But then they share their own. And it is so, words cannot express how important humor in uniform is, because like you said, this is the funniest place that I've ever been in my entire life. I've laughed about, we were in Afghanistan, and we were in the middle of this field, and it was me and my buddy Tater, Alston Tatum, we called him Tater, and we were pulling security. It was middle of the night. It was so cold. I mean, it was probably 30s or 40s. It was so cold. And we were staying that night at this ANCOP, which is the Afghan National Civil Ordnance Police, police station. And they told us that, hey, when you guys get back tonight, after doing it was a presence patrol, you can stay in a heated Connex. And we were like, that's great, right? Turns out it wasn't heated, but this is beside the point. It was there was a lamp in there. That was heated. So me and Tater were sitting there in the middle of the night, and I was like, Tater. He's like, what? I was like, heated Connex. And he started laughing. He's like, Long, what? Heated Connex. And we're laughing about heated Connex in the middle of the night in a field in Afghanistan, just freezing, until we got yelled at by my NCO. It's like, shut up about the heated Connex. Oh man, it was a good time. But
well, what doesn't kill you makes you laugh and trauma bonds you to
I'm
the people
telling
around
you,
you.
I mean, it could be trauma bonding, but it's just the funniest place. It is. I love this job. I love everything about it. The way I explain the Army, and I guess this is the best way to sum it up, is I wouldn't trade my experiences for the world, but I also wouldn't wish them on my worst enemy. So that's the way I look at the military.
So as the habitual line crosser that you are,
I am.
what is an out of the box piece of advice that you would give to soldiers who are looking to develop themselves as leaders?
Ooh, oh man, I got a lot of pieces of advice.
Fire away.
So I would say, first off, you can't know everything. It's physically impossible. you eat that humble pie, because rank doesn't matter. If that PFC is teaching you something, you pick it up and you learn it. When I came over to air defense, I was a sergeant, and I had E2s, E3s, E1s teaching me how to be an air defender. And to me, that didn't matter. They had the level of expertise. I didn't have it. So you can't know everything. You need to eat that humble pie and be able to learn. So that's number one. Number two, especially when you get to my level, your entire job, especially as a sergeant first class, is to develop that young lieutenant, to develop them in every way possible. And I live by this, and every overbearing, micromanaging officer I have ever met is the result of an incompetent platoon sergeant when they were a platoon leader. I genuinely believe that, because they had to do everybody's job, and they just got used to doing everybody's job. So now wherever they're at, they're still micromanaging because that platoon sergeant did not develop them properly. They are your responsibility. Luckily for me, every platoon leader I've ever had went on to be phenomenal commanders, because I talked to their NCOs come through this course, and they're like, oh, he used to be your PO? Yeah, he is awesome. He's on it. And I'm like, yeah, I got him there. I got him. So that's definitely a piece of advice number two. Piece of advice number three, it's never too late to stay relevant. You could always learn something new about doctrine. It's constantly updated. It's never too late to stay relevant. Number four, this will be the last one, is you have to care. When it comes to your job, when it comes to your soldiers, when it comes to your leadership, when it comes to your peers, if you care, you're going to do better than everybody around you. That's all you have to do is care.
Do you have anything additional that you'd like to share that we haven't covered?
Yeah, the buff is perfectly fine over here.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on and taking the time. I know it's been a couple months in the making, but this has been a blast.
Of
Thank
course,
you so much.
thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode of Leaders Recon, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.